Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Abigail Boucher, and I'm here today to talk to you as part of our Studying English at Aston How-To series about avoiding generalizations, which is something that you might stumble on quite a lot when you begin academic research. This is a very common problem, so don't get too discouraged if you get feedback on your work that says, oh, you've generalized here, please avoid doing that. Hopefully this video can help show you where some of these tricky areas are. So a generalization is basically just a broad comment that you've made, usually about a time period. That's the one that we see a lot, sometimes about groups of people, that you haven't substantiated with research. It's something that you don't really know for sure. You're kind of guessing, and you're making this sweeping statement about sort of everyone. And these are really sort of bad because it's not very careful or nuanced research. Um, and it can occasionally be quite damaging. It can perpetuate sometimes, harmful or at the very least incorrect information. You're assuming broad spectrum, all these people in this time period thought or did this thing. And I guess the thing to really remember is that, think about society today and how that's made up across the world. If in 100 years, if somebody's writing an essay on the year 2020, and they said everyone in the world thought this and loved this artist and acted in this sort of way and was afraid of this sort of thing, you'd think, well, that's ludicrous. The world's a big place. There are a lot of subgroups even within a single nation. We have a lot of different opinions, right? That's not to say that there couldn't be trends or prevalent modes of thought. That's fine to acknowledge, but you just have to be a little careful and a little savvy about how you word it. So in no time period ever, whether it's this year or 300 years ago or 5,000 years ago, did everyone think or do the same thing. People are just as diverse in any period as they are today. So some of the offenders that we see a lot are people in the medieval era, the Enlightenment, the 80s, thought this. And the response that I give, the feedback I'll give on your work is, okay, but that might well have been an attitude or a mode of thought, but people in what part of the world, even in what sort of part of the country. So something that might be really prevalent here in this city, 20 miles away, there might be a wildly different attitude toward. In what class group, in what ethnic or cultural group, in what political sort of realms, which social groups, in which century or decade or even specific year. Attitudes can differ wildly from year to year, even within a single person. And the big question that I ask you is, how do you know this? How are you sure? Because a lot of generalizations come from media, from especially Hollywood. We get a lot of our information about other time periods based on what we see in films, because why wouldn't we? It's very easy to access, it's very common, and we get a lot of the same messages over and over again. That doesn't mean that they're correct. So just be really careful that you're not assuming things. And we do this all the time. I'm guilty of it myself, but we just have to be careful in academic work to actually do that research. So just be sure that you can substantiate it with proof. This is sort of covering your butt. Just assume that every sentence you write, I'm going to go, how do you know that? And try to head me off at the pass. This isn't necessarily the case for things that are sort of beyond dispute. So you don't need to say, this book was written in 1732, and then you write a footnote or something. I don't need the footnote. If that's when the book is published and it's beyond dispute, that's fine. That's just a statement of fact. You don't need to back that up with proof. But it's more when you're commenting on certain traits or behaviors or beliefs that people had in another time period, because they are often quite complex, these dynamics. Some of the things that you can do to avoid generalizing, they're actually pretty easy steps. It's just getting used to knowing that you even have to question these things in the first place. So anytime you write something, just ask yourself that question that I'm going to be asking you, which is, how are you so sure? And if the answer isn't because, well, I've done a lot of research on it, and this tends to be the academic consensus, then you're probably generalizing, and you might want to go away and actually do that research. So that's step 2, is just follow through, make sure you know what you're talking about and you can evidence it to me. And then just be careful how you word things. So a lot of generalizations stem from you just not actually being that careful with your language. You could be correct in that, something is a trend, but you worded it in such a broad way that I'll say, are you sure that everyone thought that? So this is actually an easy fix. I'm going to talk to you about how to do that. So a bad argument would be the Victorians were scared of degeneration because of Charles Darwin. Okay, well, how do you know that? The Victorian era was really long. Um, degeneration is a huge concept that doesn't stem right from him. So how do you know that? If you're just a little savvier and a little more specific with your language, you could avoid this problem entirely. So you can say in the late Victorian period, right? You're narrowing down a time frame. There was some anxiety. That's true. There was about degeneration, which was in part influenced by the works of Charles Darwin. Again, you're not claiming that this guy, was solely responsible for what's a very complex problem. And then you say this is supported by, and then you get into the actual criticism and research about this. One of the other ways to avoid this when you talk about text specifically and authorial intention, I get a lot of people saying, this author intended this, this author thought this. And I'll say, how do you know what that author thought? How do you know what Charles Dickens thought? Sometimes authors can be really helpful in that they've left, say, a preface to their book where they say, actually, this is my intention, this is what I think, which is great. That's useful. You've proved it. You can, be sure to cite it. Or sometimes you can find research where critics have gone through all these authors' letters and things, and they can find proof that an author thought something, via what they've communicated to their friends. Again, great, cite that, that's fine. Most of the time, you're not going to have that evidence. So you don't actually know what an author thought. So don't generalize or assume you know what they did. Instead, focus not on what they thought, but what the text actually does. So you can't say Charles Dickens thought this. You can say, Bleak House represents whatever topic in this way. Here is my evidence with a quotation from the text. And that's how you sort of avoid generalizing about that particular sort of thing. So this, again, as I said, is sometimes a little tricky to get the hang of. You will get there. But if you have any questions, you want a little more information about how to word something just to be careful, please send me an email. I'm always happy to answer questions about